welcome to the Tech Talk Show with me, Kazim, where I sometimes host guests on the show to discuss cloud related technologies. Today's topic is about Azure, the big picture. And I have the Azure expert with me on the show today, Walt Ritscher. Welcome and thank you for joining me on the Tech Talk Show today, Walt.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to talk with you.
So I usually start the show with introductions, right? So let's start with letting my audience learn a little bit about yourself now.
Okay, so I live in the U.S. in Seattle area, about a 2-hour drive from the Microsoft campus. I work at a company called LinkedIn. I work for a part of the company called LinkedIn Learning, which is our mission there is to create training for people that use LinkedIn. So we have training on a huge variety of topics, business, creative, and I work in the tech industry, or the tech area, I should say. So I do developer specific courses for LinkedIn Learning. Usually it's Microsoft topics. So I do have some Azure courses in the library. I also have a lot of courses on Visual Studio, C#, and like stuff like that.
You know, Azure is not the only cloud provider, right?
Right.
But we can say so far, Azure has consistently been one of the top cloud providers. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, what are some of those key features of Azure that makes it attractive to businesses and developers?
That's a great question. And there's so many. Most of the big cloud providers have similar offerings. So what differentiates Azure? I think one of them is their hybrid cloud capabilities. You can integrate your on-premises infrastructure with the cloud, and that gives you you can leverage the benefits of both environments. Azure's in the last couple of years, AI and machine learning has really taken off in the Azure space. It's widely regarded as one of the best cloud platforms for that. Has a comprehensive set of tools and services for building and deploying what are called intelligent applications. And this only gets better with the new Open AI initiative that you might have heard about. So AWS and Google Cloud do provide similar services, but I think Azure's offering is more integrated and easier to use, especially for businesses that are just starting to explore the potential of AI and machine learning. There's a tool for data analytics. It's really nice. I think it's called Azure Synapse Analytics, and it makes it easy for businesses to manage big data and has a bunch of advanced analytics. I think what's different there is it comes with a lot of machine learning powered insights, and it has a lot of real-time analytics. And then let's see, I think security and compliance is good. Microsoft has always had a strong focus on security and compliance. And of course, it's cost effective. I don't know, I haven't looked at the pricing lately, but I think compared to most of its competitors, it's at the lower end of the pricing scale.
We can't talk about cloud and not talk data, right? So data is a critical component for all cloud applications. So can you please provide a summary of the different storage options available in Azure and their suitability for the different types of data?
Sure. So I would split it into two basic categories. There's the databases themselves. So they support traditional databases. Azure supports traditional databases. And then it has more cloud specific type of storage. So let's talk about the databases first. So I think the number one for Microsoft developers is, or Microsoft shops, is something called Azure SQL Database. It's a fully managed relational database service that supports all the SQL Server features, such as stored procedures. It has triggers, it has views. It is very scalable and highly performant. So you can pretty much just take your existing SQL servers, on-premises SQL servers, and port them over to Azure SQL Database. The other one is a newer database technology called Azure Cosmos DB. It's a globally distributed multimodal database service, and it supports different, it's like Microsoft's NoSQL database. So it supports several data models. It supports something called document model, the graph model, key value or table data. And it also supports, I'm missing one. It's, column family or wide column. The database engine is, Cosmos DB is really interesting because it supports what's called multiple data models. And so internally, Cosmos DB has a proprietary storage system called ARS, and that's how all the data is stored. But the way that you interact with the data is based on multiple different APIs. So there's a SQL API, there's a graph API, there's a table API, I'm missing like Cassandra's one. And so you choose how to put the data into the database using one of these APIs. And the way you read the data out is through one of these APIs, right? So if you're used to writing SQL syntax for querying, then you'd want to use the SQL API. That's the data itself looks like JSON in the SQL API, but you use a SQL-like syntax to query that data. And then the Cosmos DB itself is it's globally spread out. It's super easy to split it. You can start within one region, and then as your needs grow, you can just easily split it across other regions. And I did a whole section. We have several courses on LinkedIn Learning about Cosmos DB. And then on the non-database side, there's things like Azure File Storage for storing files and sharing files that maybe for virtual machines or services. It's very similar to file shares, but with the advantage of being scalable and secure. And then there's one, I think I'll talk about one more. There's one called Azure Blob Storage. It's basically that's for unstructured data that has no internal structure, like audio files, video files, large documents, any binary type files. And again, it's scalable and cost effective. And yeah, I think that's a good summary of what's available.
Now, let's look at Azure from a developer standpoint. I mean, so I want to ask you, Walt, from your experience, what are some of those less known languages and development tools that are available on Azure that are quite useful, but maybe I can say that not many developers know about?
Right. I think the first concept to consider is, what do we mean by Azure programming languages? And I think, to be clear, most programming languages can work in the Azure cloud. Hold on a minute. Just had a pop up there. Yeah, so most programming languages can work with the Azure cloud services. So as long as your programming language knows how to, call into the cloud, you can use that language. But I think what the question I hear you asking me is, what programming languages can we use to build Azure services? And again, Microsoft has support for a lot of programming languages. The common ones are C#, Java. Java is a well-known language, but I don't think a lot of people know that you can use it to create things like Azure microservices or Azure functions. Python's interesting. It's really grown in popularity in recent years and is now widely used in the data science and machine learning communities. So that's often used for working with Azure services. And as to your question of lesser known languages, I would point out two: Rust and F#. So Rust is a 15-year-old systems programming language that's getting popular. It focuses on performance, reliability, and safety. The syntax itself is similar to C or C++. Most people that are using Rust, at least I don't program in Rust, so I'm not that familiar with the language itself, but from what I've heard, it's mostly used for like system programming. However, in Azure, you can use it to create Azure functions. It works in something called IoT edge modules, where you're writing modules that run for your Internet of Things. They run on the edge. And then the other one is you can use it for programming in the Azure IoT Hub. And then F# is Microsoft's cross-platform open source functional programming language. One of the main features of most functional programming languages are features like immutability. Your code is immutable, pattern matching, and it's really good for asynchronous programming. And those kind of traits in any functional language are really useful for creating highly scalable code. Also, F# has a strong focus on data processing and scientific computing, so it's a good fit for building data-intensive Azure services like machine learning. I think we're going to talk about machine learning soon, aren't we?
Let's talk AI for a bit. AI seems to be the talk of the town right now. So, for developers who may not be aware of the Azure capability in AI and machine learning, do you mind? Can you please help explain how Azure supports businesses in leveraging these technologies?
Yeah, that's AI is the hottest topic, I think, on the planet right now, because of there's so many artificial intelligence services appearing. I think the first thing we should talk about is OpenAI and Microsoft. OpenAI is the technology behind ChatGPT. Anyway, Microsoft announced a couple of weeks ago that they've set up a partnership to, they set up a partnership to further extend Azure capabilities into large-scale AI systems. So their press release says, together they're going to build new Azure AI supercomputing technologies, and OpenAI is going to port its services to run on Azure. It's really early days yet on what actually is going to happen in Azure with OpenAI, so I really don't know how this is going to unfold. But even without OpenAI, Microsoft has some great stuff in Azure. I think it might be useful to talk about what the difference is between the two, artificial intelligence and machine learning. They're two related but distinct fields. AI refers to creating intelligent agents. They can perform tasks that typically would look like human level intelligence, such as perception, reasoning, learning, and decision making. Machine learning, on the other hand, is a subset of AI that involves teaching machines to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. So in other words, you could say machine learning is a method for achieving artificial intelligence. And that's typically done by creating code and algorithms that can automatically analyze the data and improve their performance based on learning from the data itself. So basically, machine learning is a part of AI development. So what I would say, if you're new to Azure and AI or machine learning, the best place to start is to look at something called Microsoft Cognitive Services, which is a collection of pre-built APIs and SDKs that enable programmers to add intelligent features to their applications. And the thing about this is you don't learning or AI to make this happen. This is the easiest lift for the dev team. These services use pre-trained models and algorithms, and basically they're the same models that Microsoft uses to power a lot of their own services. So like if you're in PowerPoint and you're using the text translation service, like you're doing a presentation and it's taking what you're speaking and putting it out as captions on the screen, that's using cognitive services. And because it's already pre-built and pre-learned, it's really easy for you to get started. And the areas that are available, there's text analytics, which is looking inside words and text for sentiment, phrasing, languages. There's computer vision. What else? There's speech services, so you can translate or transcribe speech to text and convert text to speech. You can use it to analyze a conference call and figure out who's each person in let's say there's 5 persons in the conference call. You can have it analyze, figure out which each person are, and use their names when it's transcribing the conversation. What else? There's One of the services that's used a lot in chatbots is something called language understanding, where it understands what you're saying. You know, and you and I are having this conversation here. We're having a back and forth conversation. You say something, I hear you, and then I understand what you asked me or what you said, and then I respond, right? Well, we can do a chat service, whether it's audio chat, like your assistants on your phone, or whether it's typing in a chat UI. The language understanding understands the 5 different ways you can say a phrase, and it all has the same meaning to the computer. But I could say the phrase one way, and then a minute later in the conversation, I could ask you, I could say it a different way, and you would understand what I'm talking about. Right. So I think that's an important service too. And then see, there's also AI machine learning. There's something called Azure Databricks. I haven't used that much, but my understanding of that is it's a collaborative data science platform. And then I mentioned earlier, there's something called Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a great service for big data and machine learning workflows. So I think that's there's a lot available there. And then, of course, that's just one subset of what's available in Azure.
I want to ask you, Walt, what are the key criteria for or that companies should consider when selecting a cloud provider from your experience? And in your opinion, do you think businesses should embrace strategy? Since there's the talk of multi-cloud now, almost every businesses are doing multi-cloud now.
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to that question. I think I'd start with the multi-cloud strategy, and when you say multi-cloud strategy, what I hear you saying is you mean spreading your cloud purchases across multiple providers. Is that what you mean? Okay, so the way I look at it is I think it's likely that most mid-size or large-size companies will end up buying services from multiple cloud providers. I think the bigger your company, the more likely that is to happen. I think that you will purchase your services in one of the 3 main pillars of cloud. That would be infrastructure as a service, which is outsourcing your computer infrastructure like servers and storage to the cloud. Platform as a service, which is outsourcing platform development, deployment, and maintenance to a provider. This is a lot of people use platform as a service for things like web services or web applications. And then software as a service. In this case, software applications are hosted on a provider's infrastructure and typically delivered to the customers or the employees of the company via the internet. Microsoft's a leader in that area with Office 365. So software as a service is cloud, but I find it in a lot of conversations it's not considered as such when talking about developers or talking to developers. So my thought on that is, if you're buying all these services, all 3 of those, it's best to choose one of the big umbrella cloud companies. I call them the umbrella cloud companies because companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Alibaba, and IBM all offer a wide range of services, right? And so if you choose one of those providers, most of the services that you'll want to be able to develop are available from that provider. I don't think it's a good idea to be buying your infrastructure as a service from one provider and your platform as a service from another, but companies do it. And of course, if you do have multiple providers and you want to migrate, that's some extra work there. So having said that, I recommend using an umbrella provider, picking one and staying there. But then companies also have all these niche providers. You maybe as a programmer shop, you need some DevOps services, so you might use GitHub for that. Maybe you need tools for managing your customer support tickets, and you're not going to write your own, so you might use Zendesk for that. Or you have mail marketing campaigns, so you might choose MailChimp for that. And some of these are what I call some of these I call services as a service. So you're buying the service from a provider, and these are typically web services that provide a specific and narrow set of behaviors. Oftentimes they're built as a part of a larger application. For example, as a programmer, I might need address verification or phone validation or a tax rate calculator. And so a vendor might make that as part of their tool, but then they sell that service to other developers. And that's services as a service. And I think, so to answer the question is, I think it's a good idea to pick from one of the big 5 umbrella cloud vendors, then build your services and your infrastructure there, and then choose your specialty vendors based on your business needs. And where possible, ensure that they integrate well with your main cloud vendor, right? And then the second part of your question was, how do you select a cloud provider? And gosh, there's so many factors there: performance and reliability, security and compliance. Microsoft is, speaking of security and compliance, Azure is certified to comply with security requirements from many governments, including if you're in the US and you work for any of the US government agencies. Microsoft is certified for the Department of Defense. It's something called Azure. I think it's called Azure. I think the new name is called Azure Government, the name of it, specifically for US government customers. Then you have to look at cost and pricing. Microsoft's very competitive there. Integration and interoperability, customer support, what something goes wrong, how responsive are they going to be, and then vendor stability and longevity. If you're the thing about enterprise programming and enterprise development is enterprises have long application life cycles. So you spend millions of dollars building a system for your company, you expect that system to be used for a few years, like 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. And so you want to make sure that your cloud provider is still there in 10 years. And you want to also ensure that if they do go out of business, that there's some sort of agreement in place that you can actually access their source code, so that you can actually, in the worst case scenario, move their stuff to your own servers.
Today's topic, right, is Azure, the big picture. So, and you have a LinkedIn learning course yourself with that title, right? So let's
Right.
wrap up with that. Can you tell us more about the course? Yes, and I'm also curious to know why you chose that name for the course. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'll answer that second part of that question first. So I had the idea for this course about 5 years ago. And at that time, I was traveling a lot and speaking a lot of developer conferences. I was doing about 15 conferences a year. And I'd go to these events, and there'd be lots of programmers there and other speakers talking about tech topics. And during these events, I would hear a lot of talk about Azure. But what I noticed was it was common for people to have a narrow view about what was available in Azure, the scope. You can think of the scope of Azure. And by narrow, I mean they would talk about web services and not realize that Azure had a database service, or another person would talk about infrastructure like virtual services or virtual servers and not know that Azure had cognitive services or a machine learning component. Another misconception was how it compared to Amazon Web Services. Was Azure really a viable competitor to what Amazon offered? So I wanted to create a course that addressed the massive breadth of what's available in Azure. So the big picture would be everything that's in it. So I would think of it this way. I wanted to structure it at a high level. So everyone, whether you're a seasoned developer or a new developer, you're an IT pro, you're a technical manager, you could watch this course. And it's not about the details of how to write an Azure microservice. It's about the big picture, the overview, a broad overview of what's available. And so I created the course about a year later. Right now, it's about a 3.5-hour course, and I refresh it every year. So usually in June, I redo the course and add all whatever updated content is available. So that's the motivation for it, and it has resonated really well. If we look at our statistics on the course. The job roles of the people that watch the course are very diverse. It's not just developers watching it. It's not just IT pros watching it. It's a big course. So as far as the course itself, it's about 3.5 hours long. I start out by talking about what is the cloud, what are the different types of services, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. I talk about the different market leaders, the big umbrella, the 5 big umbrella companies. Then I talk about hosting, which is Azure App Services. I talk about API and API management. There's a section on code and workflows. This is where you talk about Azure Functions, and I talk about logic apps. I have a section, we talked about databases today and storage. So there's one section on, or one chapter on Azure Storage. There's another chapter on Azure Databases. I have a chapter on infrastructure, one on DevOps, one on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then I have kind of a catch-all chapter where I talk about all the other things like Event Hub or notifications to mobile applications, or how to use IoT devices and manage them. There's a relatively new feature called Windows Virtual Desktop. We talk about that. Azure Arc and things like that. So yes, there's a lot of topics, and it gets a little bit bigger every year because Microsoft doesn't stop building new things in Azure.
Thank you very much again for spending time on the show with me today. So is there any last words from you, Walt, before we say bye-bye now?
Well, I guess I would say if you have a LinkedIn membership, if you have a premium membership, you can watch. We have, I think, I don't know what we have, 16,000, 18,000 courses. We produce about 800 new courses every year. So there's a lot of content there, including I've probably recorded 80 courses for LinkedIn Learning since I've been there. So check those out. And thanks for having me on the show. It's been great.
So here is where Walt and myself will be signing out on today's episode of the show. So if you've enjoyed it, please like, comment, and share. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So remember to continue to stay curious and keep exploring. So I'll see you next time. And it's bye-bye now from myself and Walt.